From history to histories, reimagining a new public history paradigm in a post-war context, namely Cyprus. I will be presenting this paper also on behalf of Loizos Kapsalis, who is the second author and unfortunately could not be with us today. Amidst COVID, in summer 2020, a history teacher received a phone call by some of her former students. We want a better history, they said. One that doesn't take sides and one that sees Cyprus history in its totality. The history teacher then called the second co-author of this paper, Loizos, asking him to join her in her garden. Loizos Kapsalis then recruited myself. We found ourselves in the history teacher's garden with these new people. And thus, bahçes, meaning garden, in Turkish and in Cyprus, was formed. What can an independent public history project based in Cyprus, a post-conflict setting, say about the relationship between political activism and public history? Parenthesis, we put a question mark on post. Is the absence of war peace? I close the parenthesis. By showcasing bahçes histories of Cyprus as two of its editors and founding members, we will put forward a new public history paradigm in post-conflict settings. We will maintain that public history, just like school history, has both the capacity and the obligation to enable us to think critically, understand how societies work, develop temporal orientation, and by doing all the above, make more informed and moral decisions on how our agency can foster sustainable change. Public history, putting history out there, is not a uniform field, of course, whereas nowadays it keeps expanding to include new forms and practices. Moreover, there are several debates regarding the field. For example, the nature and role of public history are central to the field's ongoing development. What constitutes public history? How does it differ from academic history? What means and media should there be used? Related to this debate, there is also the issue regarding rigorness. How can public history ensure veracity of its narratives? How can we balance accuracy with accessibility? Debates also concern access, inclusivity, representation, and participation, the latter two not being the same, of course. More recently, there have been debates regarding how technology and innovation can transform the practice of history. All the above debates are or should be underlined by ethical responsibility. What is our responsibility when discussing history? More specifically, what ethical considerations come into play when presenting historical topics to the public? Related to, yet going a step further from ethical responsibility, is advocacy. Should public historians engage in advocacy for social, political, or cultural causes? For instance, decolonization, women's history, reparations, commemoration, or should they remain neutral? Should they engage in these issues, how they should do so? Then, one step after the debate on advocacy is the debate on activism. The two differ in that while advocacy aims to effect change, activism often takes a confrontational action and a direct one. To what extent then should public historians engage in activism? Should they do so at all? Now, when it comes to post-conflict settings, the stakes are different. In the Republic of Cyprus, for example, there is still much conservatism on the broader academic and public history. Not surprisingly, what has dominated the public sphere has been the collective memory and past history approach. In Cyprus, or in fact in the Republic of Cyprus, history pointers have been oriented around liberation, apelευθέρωση, and secondly, the responsibility not to forget, δεν ξεχνώ, the Turkish invasion and still withstanding occupation of the island. Of course, the pointers when it comes to the other side of the coin, regarding the Turkish Cypriot narrative, are much different. The δεν ξεχνώ, I do not forget principle marked the public sphere for years. It even marked the schools that had it as a school year quite often. The cry has defined the social and private spheres of people so deeply that it's extremely difficult, if not completely impossible, to engage with any other kind of history. Those who do not conform to the principle and are publicly accused as reactionary, antidrastiki, and traitors, prodotes, who try to change our history with H capital, often with real consequences. This phenomenon, of course, is parallel to the decolonizing debate, and what both debates have in common is power and who controls the narrative. The hegemonic status of political history remains and has been further reinforced by the Cyprus problem, the ongoing political conflict between the Greek-Cypriot and Turkish-Cypriot communities. Debates in Cypriot historiography have revolved primarily around the emergence of opposing Greek and Turkish national identities, while these ethnic and national groups are presented as internally homogeneous, with no diversifications amongst them. Even though some efforts have been made by historians and other scholars to examine the Cypriot past through the prism of social and cultural history, these have tended to be few and far between. The last few years, there has been a shift towards multi-perspectivity. I open a parenthesis. This is also the case for schools, who also call for the overcoming of the school textbook, which is one and appointed by the government. So there has been a shift towards multi-perspectivity, for instance, by the Association of Historical Dialogue and Research, an NGO that works mainly with teachers. Certain newspapers' columns have also taken to discuss life before 1974 in a way that showcases human stories and peaceful coexistence. Still, in Cyprus, one cannot deny the overwhelming presence of a certain kind of history. That is one that sustains conflict, and by doing so, the status quo. In Cyprus, history is so politicized in the sense of perpetuating the conflict, that historians choosing not to do so leave the country, going back to the real consequences we mentioned before. Coming to the case study of Bahçe's Histories of Cyprus, where does the project stand in relation to all the above and in relation to the issue of political activism? The process of building and launching Bahçe's was long and an intricate one. The young men that approached the history teacher, who then recruited myself and Loizos, asked, in fact, for a reading group. We proposed something different. We proposed episodes where they would be open for the public. So each session would be a conversation between a scholar or a practitioner and one of the editors. And then there would be a Q&A. The project started during COVID, so this would be online. The group discussed and settled on Bahçe's, meaning garden, signifying openness, and also organic processes of how we raise questions, how we find sources, and coexistence of different elements. Following careful consideration, the core team made the decision to abstain from engaging with or publicly taking a position on current or past events related to the political situation in Cyprus. Much of our time was dedicated in capacity building, that is, building the two teams, the editorial team that would flesh out topics, find scholars, and so on, and the communication teams building social media, the website, and also translating in Greek and in Turkish. At all times, there were different opinions and interpretations. There were definitely different positionalities and aims. After 9 months, the project was launched. Since the project was launched, it materialized many episodes. We discussed where are the women in Cypriot history, the ecology of coexistence in conflict, discussing environment and colonialism. We looked for the Byzantine warrior hero. Who was he? We discussed water and resilience, dervishes, and women's rituals in Nicosia. We explore identities in the old quarters of Nicosia. We discuss the colonial rule and how it differed for Cypriots, discussing different experiences. We discuss colonial technopolitics. We discuss space and society, but in urban and rural Ottoman Cyprus through technology. We discussed fish and chips, that is the peasant Cyprus in Australia. We discussed the Cypriot fiddler, an oral history of professional class in the 20th century. Since then, we have engaged in hybrid events, and now we are making an opening to more public history. For instance, we will be participating in an intangible heritage festival. We have also been invited to hold a hybrid event in the launch of an art exhibition discussing art in Cyprus. Now, our methodology and practices, ownership. The members of the group core team play an active role in defining the content. The members also are responsible for translating content in images, something that nowadays also happens in classroom, these translations. Our members also think how translations should capture nuances in different languages. Co-creation, by this ownership, we do engage in co-creation, and the co-creation continues after the episodes because we have reviews and we have reflections in our blog. Our third principle is operating with different positionalities and multi-perspectivity, as I've shown through the case of different episodes. Also, it's important to highlight that in each of the episodes we have, the episode begins with questions that allow each scholar's past life, personal interest, and aims to come to the surface, thus bringing to the fore the guest's positionality and how this might have informed their work, practices, and decision regarding their work. And lastly, the fourth principle is going against the dominant narrative, not by confronting it directly, but by suggesting an alternative understanding of how Cyprus historiography can work. Activism, question mark. I'm aware of the time, so I'll make a summary of this section. So, is Barthes' work activist? The two authors writing this paper had different opinions on this. We decided, since the second author is not here, not to go deeply into that. Also checking in very quickly with other members of the community, indeed there are very different opinions. I have to go back to the beginning on how Barthes was formed and say that most of the young people who made that phone call to their history teacher are activists. Some of them in radical groups, all of them in bicommunal groups. Many of the people who engage with Barthes are again in this kind of social communities. We do therefore have, let's say, an activist underlining. Now, given that we have activism with a question mark, where does that leave us? Is Barthes' vision, mission, and modus operandi activist or not? What we, the two authors of the article, absolutely agree with is that it cannot be doubted that Barthes' work is inherently political. It is political in that it cultivates critical thinking. It is political in that it enables orientation by enabling people understanding society and also themselves. And it's inherently political in that it builds the sense of a community. Going to the final reflections. Should history act with ethical responsibility and towards change? Our answer is that by acting ethically, it is very probable that we do the second. Now, if we raise the question of whether history should consciously and a priori set out to act towards change, the answer is more convoluted. We are concerned that by setting, for example, change or moral repair as an agenda and an ultimate goal, the capacity and true potential of history might be compromised in different ways. To bring an example, for example, teaching that we were like brothers, a common belief in Cyprus from those who adhere to the unofficial history, and also a position that has been taken by some researchers, might be limiting in that it simplifies and generalizes. In fact, people's coexistence and interaction depended on a number of factors: the percentage of each community, who worked for whom, class, and gender. What is lost in this case is building the capacity to see the historical nuances. Moreover, research has shown that when people, all children, young people, and adults, are confronted with radically different narratives from the ones they have been so far exposed to, they might employ different mechanisms of engaging with them. For instance, appropriating, epistemic switching, or even rejecting these different narratives altogether. What is compromised in this case is allowing those exposed to history to engage deeply with historical interpretations in a constructive manner. We do not argue that public history should refrain from putting history out there. Quite the opposite. History is not the property of historians. Historians have a duty to expand public access, and this is what we do in Burgess. Not only this, we strongly believe that this is the direction public history needs to take in order to be occupied with and oppressed by history. In response to this, we argue that rather by taking sides, we should be thinking about how to empower everyone to ask questions and look for answers through histories. It is with this rationale, and I finish with this, that whether activist or not, we argue that history owes to provide new openings through questions, theories, methodologies, media, and positionalities. In this way, we can go beyond the dominant voices existing at the moment, that is, going beyond an obsession with maintaining or responding to the history of conflict, and build a new paradigm. If we create these spaces, people might feel more ready to see themselves as agents of change. They might also feel empowered to make more informed decisions. After all, what is more political than that, and possibly activist? Thank you very much.